Daniel Harper stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows of his Manhattan apartment, the skyline of New York stretching like a glittering web beneath him. The city's heartbeat pulsed in his ears, the distant sirens, the hum of traffic, the occasional echo of a saxophone from some unseen street corner. It was a Tuesday morning, and the sunlight poured in at an angle that made the glass glint like liquid gold. Daniel liked mornings like this, quiet, ordered, predictable. Yet today, even the light felt wrong. From the kitchen came the faint clatter of dishes, a sound that should have been innocuous, domestic. But Daniel's ears caught something in it, a hesitation, a slight tremor in Olivia's voice as she called for Emily to finish her breakfast. He frowned, setting his coffee down, feeling an unease he couldn't immediately name. Olivia Harper had always been the kind of woman who radiated composure. Her long brown hair fell effortlessly around her shoulders, her posture precise, her smile measured. She had been beautiful once, and that unobtrusive, effortless way that made people think the world had been kind to her. But lately, Daniel noticed that her gaze often lingered too long on him, assessing, weighing, a trace of doubt in her eyes. Emily, their 17-year-old daughter, had inherited Olivia's sharpness, but with a sharper edge. Bright, articulate, and quick to read the room, Emily was the kind of child who could make anyone feel exposed, as if she were cataloging every imperfection. This morning, she lingered over her cereal, stirring absent-mindedly, her gaze flicking between her mother and Daniel in a way that felt deliberate. "You forgot to sign the forms for the school trip," Olivia said, her tone casual but clipped. I thought I had sent them last week." Daniel looked up, blinking, momentarily puzzled. I thought I had sent them last week." Olivia's lips pressed into a thin line. "You did not. Emily reminded me yesterday." The words should have been inconsequential, trivial even, but Daniel felt the weight of them, the subtle insinuation lurking beneath them. In the past, Olivia would have shrugged, smiled, and let it pass. Today there was a pause, a hesitation that felt loaded with judgment. Emily smirked slightly, just enough for Daniel to notice. A small victory, unspoken, lingering in the space between them. Daniel's stomach tightened. He had learned early in his career to read these silent dynamics, to anticipate the underlying currents. But this felt personal, insidious in its intimacy. After breakfast, Daniel went to his home office, a sleek space filled with bookshelves heavy with legal tomes, awards, and framed photographs of a family who once seemed unshakable. He sat at his mahogany desk, opened his laptop, and tried to focus on the case files spread before him. But the hum of tension followed him like a shadow. He remembered briefly a conversation with his mentor, years ago, about the fragility of perception. People will believe what they want to believe. Not what they see, not what's true. What they feel is real to them becomes real, his mentor had said. Daniel had dismissed it then, confident in his ability to manage appearances. Today, it seemed a warning he should have heeded. By late afternoon, Olivia had retreated to the balcony, phone in hand, her gaze distant as she scrolled. Daniel noticed the subtle tightening of her jaw when she typed something quickly and then deleted it. Emily was in her room, the sound of music faintly leaking through the walls, deliberate, a backdrop to a day that now felt like a chessboard. When Daniel returned from a brief walk in the neighborhood, a habit he'd always maintained to clear his mind, he found Olivia seated at the dining table, a stack of papers in front of her. "Daniel," she said, softly, almost too softly, "have you been truthful with me about everything?" The question struck him with a quiet force. The way she asked it as if testing, prodding a blade hidden in silk made him pause. He said, "Of course," steady, careful. "Why would you ask that?" She looked down at the papers, her fingers tapping nervously. I need to be sure. Things don't always add up." Daniel's chest tightened. He wanted to reach for her hand to bridge the sudden widening gap, but something in her posture, her averted gaze held him back. He realized with a cold clarity that something more insidious had begun, a shift in the dynamics of trust, subtle yet irreversible unless confronted. That night, As he lay awake in the bedroom, the city lights bleeding through the curtains, Daniel could feel the first cracks appearing in what had once been perfection. Small lies, half-truths, the manipulations of a childhood learns to wield influence like a weapon. He had seen this pattern in courtroom cases countless times. Deception, carefully constructed, eroding the foundations of belief. But now the deception was personal, intimate, and targeted at him. He thought of Emily, her quick smile, the cleverness in her eyes, and he thought of Olivia, her trust fraying like delicate lace. Somewhere between love and suspicion, he realized the family he had built on truth and loyalty was starting to fracture. And yet, in the quiet of the night, Daniel resolved not to act rashly. He would watch, listen, endure. Because the cracks, though small, were only the beginning. And the truth, he knew, had a way of revealing itself when patience and scrutiny met deception. Outside, the city roared, indifferent. Inside, a perfect life had begun to tremble.
The morning light seeped through the blinds in a thin, cautious line, as if wary of intruding upon the tension that now hung in the Harper household. Daniel moved quietly through the apartment, the faint creak of hardwood floors under his feet sounding unnaturally loud. Each step seemed measured, deliberate, as though the air itself had become fragile, ready to shatter at any misstep. Emily Harper was already awake, scrolling through her phone in bed, earbuds in, a faint smirk playing at the corners of her lips. Daniel had come to recognize those moments, the silent plotting, the internal calculations behind her gaze. It was as if the teenager had become a strategist in some invisible war, and he was merely a pawn yet to be moved. He poured himself a cup of coffee and leaned against the counter, pretending to read the morning news. Olivia appeared moments later, impeccably dressed for work, her expression calm, but eyes shadowed with doubt. Daniel watched her from across the kitchen, noting the subtle stiffness in her movements, the slight hesitation before she spoke. "Daniel, did you lock the car last night?" Olivia asked, voice casual but with an edge Daniel could not ignore. He raised an eyebrow. "Of course. Why?" I thought I heard the alarm this morning. Maybe I imagined it," though she lingered on him with scrutiny. Emily snickered softly from her room, a sound that seemed far too loud in the tense stillness. Daniel's heart tightened. It was the first time he truly felt the deliberate nature of her actions, the timing, the tone, the small triumphs she allowed herself. Later that day, Daniel received a text from Olivia while he was at work. "Can we talk tonight? I'm not sure about some things." The message was innocuous, but the ellipses lingered like a shadow, leaving Daniel uneasy. At his office, the noise of the city outside the tall glass windows, a constant pulse of traffic, sirens, chatter, contrasted starkly with the silent storm brewing at home. Emily had begun planting small seeds of doubt, strategically timed remarks about Daniel's behavior, innocuous questions that sounded like concern but carried insinuation. "Mom, did Dad really go to that client meeting yesterday? He seemed different." She asked the question with carefully measured curiosity, the kind that demanded thought but allowed no direct accusation. Olivia, already under strain from her own work and societal expectations of perfection, was receptive. She wanted to believe in the best, yet the hints of dishonesty, however small, seemed to confirm a fear she hadn't known she harbored. Daniel, sensing the manipulation, could only maintain composure outwardly while his mind ran through every possible scenario, every misstep that might be twisted against him. By evening, the tension had escalated. Daniel returned home to find the apartment quiet, unnervingly so. Olivia was in the living room, scrolling through her laptop with her lips pressed tightly together. The soft hum of the computer was punctuated by the occasional sigh. Daniel noticed her glance toward him, assessing, cautious. "Daniel, do you ever feel like sometimes things just don't add up?" Olivia asked, her tone hesitant. Daniel considered his words carefully. "What do you mean?" he said, keeping his voice neutral. "I don't know. Little things. Like appointments, or the way you react to Emily sometimes." Daniel nodded slowly. He'd heard this phrasing before. It was vague enough to allow suspicion to grow unchecked, specific enough to sting. He realized Emily had been coaching Olivia, guiding her perceptions like a puppeteer pulling strings from behind the scenes. Dinner was quiet, filled with the occasional clatter of utensils. Emily's presence was pronounced despite her silence, her calculated glances, the subtle smirk when she caught a shared look between Daniel and Olivia. Daniel knew that the teenager's enjoyment came not from malice alone, but from control, the intoxicating sense of power that came from watching the adults around her question themselves. After Emily retreated to her room under the guise of finishing homework, Daniel attempted to bridge the gap with Olivia. "I can't help but notice tension lately. Is this about Emily?" Olivia avoided his gaze, fiddling with a napkin. I I don't know. Maybe. I just feel like I can't see clearly anymore. Like something is off, and I can't figure out what it is. Daniel exhaled slowly, choosing silence over argument. Words now felt inadequate. Any defense could be reframed, twisted, or used as proof against him. He had entered a silent battlefield, one without witnesses, one where perception had become reality. Later, as the city lights flickered on, reflecting against the glass walls of their apartment, Daniel stood alone in the kitchen, staring at his reflection in the stainless steel of the refrigerator. He studied the lines of his face, the exhaustion creeping at the edges of his eyes. How had things shifted so subtly, so completely? He had provided love, honesty, and structure, yet doubt had seeped in like a slow poison. Emily's voice from the other room humming a soft, almost imperceptible tune echoed faintly. Daniel realized that what he was facing wasn't a momentary lapse in trust, it was the deliberate erosion of belief, constructed piece by piece, invisible to anyone but him. He felt the weight of isolation pressing down, the fragility of appearances he had once taken for granted. And yet, amid the quiet despair, a part of Daniel remained resolute. He would not react hastily. He would observe, endure, and prepare. For in deception, there were always traces, patterns, and eventually, exposure. Patience would be his ally, vigilance his shield. That night, as the apartment settled into silence and Olivia lay awake with questions she could not voice, Daniel allowed himself a moment to breathe, to ground himself. The seeds of deception had been sown, subtle and insidious, but they had not yet taken root fully. He would wait, carefully, and watch as the narrative around him unfolded. In the quiet, Daniel felt a single certainty. Truth, no matter how patiently buried, had a way of resurfacing. And when it did, the house that seemed perfect might finally reckon with the fractures forming beneath its polished surface. The city felt heavier that week, as if New York itself sensed the tension creeping into the Harper household. Daniel moved through the streets with practiced ease, but each honking horn, each hurried passerby seemed amplified, echoing the growing unease at home. Every sidewalk cafe, glassy skyscraper, and crowded subway car was a reminder of the world outside, a world that could judge, speculate, and misconstrue in ways Daniel had never feared before. Olivia had started confiding in friends under the guise of casual conversation. At brunch with her colleagues, she laughed lightly, stirring her cappuccino, yet Daniel's name slipped between her sentences like a shadow. Sometimes I wonder," she said, voice soft enough to seem idle, "about some of the choices Daniel makes. I know it sounds silly, but it's unsettling." Her friends nodded, knowingly, exchanging glances that Daniel could only imagine in hindsight. They offered no advice, no reassurance, just an unspoken confirmation of her doubts. In Olivia's social circle, appearances were everything. Questions without answers, suspicions without proof, and carefully curated concerns were enough to plant seeds of rumor. Emily watched this unfold with satisfaction. She had learned that people believed what they wanted, that perception could be molded like clay. Her smirk returned as she overheard snippets of Olivia's conversation later that evening. Phrases like, "I just don't know who to trust," and "he's been distant lately," lingering in her mind like trophies. Back home, Daniel felt the weight of it pressing down on him, subtle but suffocating. Friends who once greeted him warmly now offered polite smiles tinged with hesitation. A neighbor mentioned, casually, that she had seen Olivia looking distressed the previous weekend. Colleagues noticed his quietness in meetings and whispered among themselves about something in the Harper household. Daniel's lawyerly mind cataloged every interaction, every ambiguous remark. He understood the mechanics of doubt, the way it could spread quietly, invisibly like smoke, and yet nothing prepared him for the internal torment of watching his family's perception of him erode piece by piece, manipulated by subtle lies he could neither immediately prove nor confront directly. One evening, Olivia returned from a social gathering, her expression taut with worry. Daniel, cooking dinner for himself and Emily, glanced up. "How was your evening?" he asked, neutral, careful. "Fine," Olivia said, though her tone lacked conviction. She set her handbag down, eyes darting momentarily to Emily, who pretended to be absorbed in her homework. "Fine, but I overheard some things. People, they notice. They notice the tension, Daniel. They talk." Daniel paused, spoon in hand. He wanted to respond, to reassure, to dispel the subtle poison of rumor, but he knew that any word now could be twisted, used as evidence of guilt. He simply nodded. "Let's focus on the facts, Olivia. We'll address it calmly." But Olivia's doubts, now entwined with the opinions of friends, colleagues, and neighbors, had grown roots. She found herself second-guessing every glance, every word from Daniel. The ease of trust she had once carried was gone, replaced by a slow, gnawing anxiety. Emily, meanwhile, continued her quiet orchestration. She left small notes around the apartment, seemingly innocuous. A diary page carelessly left on the counter, a half-typed text message open on her tablet, phrases carefully chosen to imply Daniel's indifference or secretive behavior. Each act was subtle, calculated, designed to confirm Olivia's growing apprehension.
Daniel noticed the shift in his own demeanor. He became more guarded, aware of every gesture, every glance, every word. Social interactions outside the home felt like navigating a minefield. Conversations were filtered, carefully measured, because he knew that perception had become a weapon against him. Friends he had known for years seemed distant, their smiles polite but uncertain. The weight of collective scrutiny pressed on him, relentless, subtle, merciless. By midweek, Olivia had begun to confide even more openly, her fears now fueled by social validation. "People think I'm crazy," she admitted one night, voice barely above a whisper. "But I can't ignore what Emily says, or what I see." Daniel sat across from her at the dining table, watching the familiar lines of her face etched with anxiety. He wanted to reach across the table, to soothe, to anchor her back to reason. But he realized that reason alone could not counteract the social currents now tugging at her perceptions. The whispers of others, the subtle suggestions, the quiet glances, these were forces stronger than any personal reassurance he could offer. The pressure continued to mount. At work, Daniel caught glimpses of colleagues exchanging looks when his name came up in conversation. Emails were delayed, meetings rescheduled. The city, a constant background of noise and light, now felt judgmental, each pedestrian a potential witness to his perceived failings. He felt the isolation deepen, the silent weight of being under scrutiny without recourse. And then came the subtle confrontations. Olivia's questions, Emily's remarks, neighbors' casual comments, colleagues' pointed inquiries. Each one seemed minor, almost negligible, but together they formed a relentless storm. Daniel realized that the truth alone could not immediately combat the network of perception and insinuation. He needed patience, strategy, and an unshakable composure. That night, as he walked the quiet streets after dinner, the city lights reflected on the wet pavement, shimmering like fractured glass. Daniel thought about the delicate balance of trust and perception, how easily one's life could be destabilized by whispers, rumors, and carefully planted doubts. He understood now, fully, the power of social pressure.
and he braced himself for what it might provoke at home, the inevitable confrontation that would test not just his patience, but the very foundation of the family he had built. Back at the apartment, Olivia sat alone on the balcony, the city sprawling endlessly before her. Emily's laughter, muffled but audible, drifted from her room, and Daniel, watching from the kitchen window, recognized the widening fissures in the life he had once thought unbreakable. The cracks were no longer subtle, they were real, tangible, and growing. In the quiet, he made a silent vow. He would endure, he would observe, and he would wait. The seeds of deception had been sown, nourished by social pressures and whispered confirmations, but he believed, deeply, unwaveringly, that truth, when finally confronted, could outlast even the most pervasive web of doubt.
The Harper apartment felt smaller now, constricted by the unspoken tensions that lingered in every corner. The walls, once warm with family memories and laughter, now seemed to echo back doubts and half-formed suspicions. Daniel moved through the rooms like a careful observer, aware that every gesture, every glance could be interpreted in ways he could not control. That evening, Olivia returned home later than usual, her heels clicking sharply against the hardwood floors. She seemed distracted, distant, her face composed yet fraught with unspoken questions. Daniel noticed her hands trembling slightly as she set down her purse. The small, almost imperceptible movements made him aware of the depth of her unease. "Daniel," Olivia began, her voice low and hesitant, "can we talk?" He nodded, taking a seat across from her at the dining table. The room smelled faintly of the dinner Emily had left behind, barely touched, a silent testament to the teenager's growing disengagement. Olivia avoided his gaze. "I don't know how to explain. It's like I see things differently now. Little things that didn't matter before feel wrong." Her hands clenched briefly around the edge of the table, knuckles white. "I hear Emily sometimes, and I think, maybe she's right. Maybe I've been blind to things I shouldn't have been." Daniel's chest tightened. He had anticipated this confrontation, but the words still struck with a quiet force. He wanted to reach out, to reassure her, to untangle the web of manipulation that Emily had carefully spun. Yet he knew that logic alone could not undo the spiral already in motion. Emily appeared at the doorway, pretending to ask for a textbook. Her timing was deliberate, calculated. She lingered just long enough to witness the tension, her eyes scanning her mother and father as if taking notes for some private archive. Daniel caught the subtle smirk curling at the edges of her lips, a triumph barely contained, yet potent in its quiet cruelty. Dinner was a muted affair. Olivia poked at her food absent-mindedly, her mind consumed with doubt. Daniel spoke little, careful with every word, aware that any defense might be misconstrued. Emily remained mostly silent. The occasional glance and subtle body language reminded Daniel of her growing influence over her mother's perceptions. Later, Olivia sat on the sofa, scrolling through messages she had received from friends. Some were casual inquiries, others carried gentle affirmations of concern. "Maybe I'm imagining things," she murmured, more to herself than to Daniel. "But everyone seems to see what I'm feeling. Maybe I'm not crazy." Daniel approached cautiously. "Olivia, I understand your doubts, but you need to look at what's real, not just what's implied. Emily's words, they're influencing your perception." Olivia flinched slightly at the directness, her hands fidgeting with the fabric of her blouse. "I don't know anymore. I don't know." The emotional spiral had begun in earnest. Trust, once a stable foundation, had become a fragile thread. Every interaction, every exchange, carried the weight of suspicion. Daniel felt it pressing against his chest, an invisible hand tightening around his heart.
Emily continued her subtle manipulations with precision. She would leave carefully worded notes around the apartment, half phrases that implied neglect or secrecy. Small questions meant to provoke anxiety. "Mom, did Dad really call that client today?" Or, "I saw him leave the house late last night. Why?"
Each one was a seed planted, growing roots in Olivia's mind, twisting perceptions into doubt. One evening, Daniel found Olivia in their bedroom staring at her reflection in the mirror. Her eyes were glassy, troubled. "I feel disconnected from everything," she confessed. "From you, from Emily, even from myself. I don't know what's true anymore." Daniel stepped closer, careful not to startle her. "Olivia, I am here. I haven't changed. I am the same man you married. The lies, the insinuations, they are not who I am." She shook her head slowly. "It doesn't feel that way. The things Emily says, the way people look at you, I can't ignore it." Her voice broke slightly, the emotional strain she had carried for weeks now surfacing in quiet tremors. Outside, the city lights reflected off the windows, casting fragmented patterns across the room. Daniel thought of the countless hours he had spent building a life rooted in honesty, only to watch it erode in silence, piece by piece. The emotional spiral had no grand confrontation yet. It was subtle, insidious, like a slow leak that threatened to drain everything from within. Emily watched from her room as the evening unfolded. Her music was soft, almost imperceptible, but it punctuated the tension, a soundtrack to the growing chasm between her parents. Every glance, every pause, every carefully staged remark served to tighten the grip of uncertainty on Olivia. Daniel knew the pattern. He had seen manipulations like this in courtroom cases, but the difference was chilling. This time it was personal, intimate, inescapable. By nightfall, Olivia was exhausted, her mind a whirl of imagined scenarios, what-ifs, and doubts. Daniel retreated to his study, poring over work to occupy himself, to anchor his thoughts. He scribbled notes, reviewed cases, anything to keep his mind from spiraling alongside the household. But no amount of focus could fully shield him from the creeping anxiety, the gnawing sense of betrayal, silent, invisible, but palpable. In the quiet, Daniel reflected on the nature of influence and control. Emily's cleverness, combined with Olivia's vulnerability to suggestion, had created a perfect storm. The emotional spiral was no accident. It was crafted with intent, nurtured carefully. And Daniel, despite his awareness, could do little in the moment to halt its momentum. As the apartment settled into silence, Daniel walked past the rooms, noting the subtle signs of tension. The folded blankets, the half-empty coffee cups, the discarded notes. Each detail a thread in a complex tapestry of doubt, woven by a child who had learned the power of observation and a mother whose trust had begun to fray. Daniel lay awake that night, the city a distant roar beneath the windows, and felt the weight of the spiral pressing down. He realized that confrontation was inevitable, that truths would eventually clash with lies, and that patience, endurance, and careful observation would be his only allies. The emotional spiral had begun, and its path was unpredictable, threatening to alter everything he had once believed secure. And yet, amidst the turmoil, Daniel held on to one certainty. The truth is enduring. Lies can grow, doubts can fester, but facts, evidence, and integrity would eventually pierce through the fog. The emotional spiral was relentless, but Daniel knew that its momentum, if carefully navigated, could also lead to revelation.
The Harper apartment had grown oppressive, the walls seeming to close in as the tension reached a critical mass. Daniel returned home one evening earlier than usual, expecting the quiet of routine, but the air was thick, heavy with anticipation. Olivia stood near the kitchen counter, her posture rigid, eyes darting toward him as he entered. Emily lingered by the doorway, arms crossed, smirking in a way that made Daniel's stomach tighten. "Daniel," Olivia began, her voice trembling yet deliberate, "we need to talk, now." Daniel nodded slowly, aware that the moment he had been bracing for had arrived. "Of course," he said evenly, keeping his tone calm. "What's going on?" Olivia's eyes glistened with unshed tears. "It's Emily. Everything she's been saying, I don't know what to believe anymore. I can't ignore it." Emily stepped forward, feigning innocence, her voice sweet, calculated. "Mom, I just want you to see the truth. I've been telling you what's real." Her words were sharp in their precision, designed to provoke, to manipulate, to seed doubt. Daniel felt a surge of frustration, tempered by the need to maintain composure. He had endured weeks of subtle manipulations, whispered doubts and insinuations. Now the carefully constructed veil of deceit was laid bare, demanding confrontation. "Olivia," Daniel said, his voice firm but measured,
I am the man you married. Everything Emily has told you is false. She's manipulating you, using your trust to her advantage. I have done nothing to betray this family." Olivia shook her head, her hands trembling. I don't know. The little things, the missed calls, the late nights, the way you've been distant, I don't know how to interpret them." Emily's eyes gleamed with the thrill of control. "Mom, you need to see. He's hiding things from you. I've noticed it too, all along." Daniel took a deep breath, steadying himself. He realized that logic alone could not break through the web of deception Emily had spun. Emotions had taken root. Fear, doubt, and a longing for certainty had clouded judgment. He needed evidence, undeniable proof. "Enough," he said, his voice cutting through the room like a sharp blade. "I will show you everything. All the documents, the messages, the facts. You will see the truth for yourselves, not through insinuations or lies." Olivia's face softened slightly, a flicker of hesitation. She wanted to believe him, but the weeks of manipulated doubt had entrenched themselves deeply. Emily, sensing the threat to her control, retreated subtly, her smirk fading, replaced by a thin veil of defensiveness. The following days were a tense whirlwind. Daniel meticulously gathered records, texts, and documents that reflected his unwavering honesty. Every appointment, every client meeting, every communication carefully logged and verifiable. He presented them to Olivia methodically, step by step, leaving no room for interpretation or misrepresentation. Olivia's hands shook as she reviewed the materials, her eyes widening as realization dawned. The carefully constructed illusions that Emily had built crumbled before the undeniable evidence. Weeks of doubt and tension fell away, leaving a hollow ache of guilt and regret in their wake. Emily, confronted with the undeniable truth, reacted with a mixture of anger, frustration, and confusion. How could you let me get away with this?" Olivia asked sharply, turning toward her daughter, her voice carrying the weight of betrayal and hurt. Emily's defenses faltered. I just wanted you to pay attention, to notice me. I didn't mean for it to go this far." The confrontation left the apartment in a fragile silence. Olivia sank onto the sofa, burying her face in her hands, her trust in Daniel shaken but ultimately restored by evidence. Daniel stood nearby, exhausted yet resolute, realizing the emotional cost had been immense, not just for himself but for Olivia and Emily as well. In the following days, the household began the slow process of recalibration. Olivia attempted to rebuild trust, acknowledging the manipulation she allowed to take root. Emily faced the consequences of her actions, understanding for the first time the weight of deceit and the pain it could cause. Daniel, though relieved, felt a lingering wariness, knowing that the fragility of trust could be tested again. One evening, Daniel found Olivia in the kitchen, quietly preparing a simple meal. She looked up as he entered, her eyes meeting his with a mixture of remorse and gratitude. "I'm sorry," she said softly. "I should have trusted you sooner. I let everything cloud my judgment." Daniel nodded, reaching out to take her hand gently. "We all make mistakes," he replied. "What matters is what we do after. We face the truth together." Emily lingered in the doorway, silent, her expression subdued. The lesson had been harsh, but real. The thrill of manipulation was replaced by a sobering awareness of its consequences. For the first time, she saw the pain she had caused and the importance of honesty, empathy, and trust. The Harper household was far from perfect. The scars of doubt and deception would remain, subtle reminders of the emotional storm they had weathered. But the breaking point had been reached, and in its aftermath, a new understanding began to wreak root. Fragile, tentative, but grounded in truth. Daniel stood by the window that night, looking out over the city that had always been his constant, his anchor. The lights of Manhattan shimmered like countless stories unfolding simultaneously, some fractured, some whole. He thought of his family, imperfect yet enduring, and felt a quiet determination. They had survived the breaking point, and though trust would need time to heal, the foundation of truth had been reaffirmed. Outside, the city roared on, indifferent to the intimate battles within one apartment. Inside, Daniel Harper breathed deeply, aware that while deception had tested them, resilience and honesty had the power to restore even the most fractured bonds.
The morning air in Manhattan carried a crispness that hinted at change. Daniel walked along the streets with purposeful steps, the city bustling around him as if unaware of the quiet storm brewing in his own life. He carried with him a folder of documents, evidence meticulously organized, each piece a testament to the truth he had been safeguarding. Today, he would begin to reveal it, not with anger, not with accusation, but with clarity. Back at the Harper apartment, Olivia sat at the kitchen table, nursing a cup of coffee. The events of the past weeks had left her raw, vulnerable, yet contemplative. She was no longer consumed by doubt, but the residue lingered, a mixture of shame, guilt, and cautious hope. Emily, sensing a shift, hovered nearby, her earlier confidence diminished, her eyes uncertain. Daniel entered quietly, placing the folder on the table. "Olivia," he said, voice calm but firm, "I've gathered everything. Everything you might have questioned, every detail, every communication. I want us to go through it together." Olivia nodded slowly, apprehension flickering in her eyes. I'm ready." She had spent nights reflecting, weighing the trust she had almost lost, realizing that understanding the truth required courage. Daniel opened the folder, spreading the neatly organized documents across the table. Each email, each client report, each message from colleagues was a clear thread in a tapestry of honesty and consistency. Olivia leaned in, her eyes scanning, her fingers lightly tracing the edges of papers she had once glanced at with suspicion. This proves everything," Olivia whispered. Her voice trembled, a mixture of relief and lingering remorse. She looked up at Daniel, searching his face for reassurance. I can't believe I doubted you so completely." Daniel reached across the table, gently taking her hand. "It's okay. Deception can be subtle. It grows in silence. The important part is that we faced it together and uncovered it." Emily, sitting quietly at the edge of the kitchen, absorbed every word. The realization settled over her slowly. Her carefully orchestrated doubts, her manipulation, had been exposed. She felt a sting of regret, a deep awareness of the consequences her actions had wrought. "Emily," Daniel said softly, his gaze firm but compassionate, "you've learned a valuable lesson. Manipulation hurts everyone, even those we love most. You can't undo the past, but you can choose how to move forward." Emily's eyes filled with tears. I didn't mean for it to go this far," she admitted, voice cracking. I just wanted you to notice me, to pay attention to me." Olivia's hand went to her daughter's, squeezing gently. "You are noticed, Emily. We both love you, but trust must be earned, not coerced. You need to understand that our family works together honestly, or it falls apart." The atmosphere in the apartment shifted subtly. Tension remained, but now it carried a fragile hope, a recognition that truth, though delayed, had begun to heal the fractures. Daniel felt the weight he had carried begin to lift, replaced by a measured optimism that the family could rebuild stronger, with lessons learned etched into their shared consciousness. That evening, Daniel and Olivia revisited old conversations, messages, and decisions, tracing the threads of deception that Emily had spun. With each document, each proof, the emotional fog lifted. Olivia's eyes softened as she recognized the deliberate and subtle nature of her daughter's influence, understanding that doubt had not originated from Daniel, but from misdirection. Emily, sitting silently, processed the confrontation with growing awareness. The thrill of control she had once enjoyed was replaced by humility, a recognition of the pain caused by her actions. She listened as Daniel and Olivia discussed patterns, evidence, and perceptions, absorbing the lesson in a quiet, reflective way. The revelation also brought clarity to Daniel. He saw not only the consequences of manipulation, but the fragile dynamics of trust within a family. The ease of assumption, the subtle power of suggestion, and the sway of social pressures were forces that could erode the strongest bonds if left unchecked. Yet with patience, vigilance, and transparency, those bonds could be restored. By nightfall, the apartment felt lighter, the walls no longer closing in. Daniel moved through the rooms, observing small tangible signs of change, Olivia's relaxed posture as she read through the documents, Emily's subdued demeanor,
and the gentle hum of a home beginning to breathe again. As he stood by the window, looking out over the city lights, he reflected on the journey that had brought them here. Weeks of subtle deception, social pressure, and emotional manipulation had tested them, forcing them to confront uncomfortable truths and navigate the storm with care. Now, with the revelations laid bare, the path toward reconciliation was open, fragile, but real. Olivia joined him at the window, her hand finding his. "Thank you," she said softly, "for your patience, your integrity, for showing me what's real." Daniel smiled faintly, squeezing her hand. "Truth has a way of coming out, Olivia. Sometimes it takes time, but it's always worth waiting for." Emily entered quietly, her steps hesitant. She looked at both of them, then lowered her gaze, a subtle acknowledgement of the lessons she had learned. For the first time, she understood that honesty, not manipulation, was the foundation upon which trust and love must rest. That night, as the city hummed beneath them, the Harper family sat together in a quiet, contemplative circle. The tension had not vanished entirely. Healing as rarely appeared. Revelation had begun, and with it came the fragile promise of reconciliation, awareness, and the slow rebuilding of trust. In the silence that followed, Daniel felt a cautious optimism. The storm had passed its fiercest point, leaving behind the opportunity to mend, to reconnect, and to nurture the fragile bonds that tied them together. The journey was far from over, but for the first time in weeks, the Harper household could breathe without the constant, suffocating weight of unspoken doubts.
The Harper apartment was tense in a way that made every creak of the floorboards sound magnified. Every shadow seemed to watch. Daniel had called for a family meeting, not out of anger, but out of necessity, a chance to address the web of lies, manipulations, and misunderstandings that had festered for weeks. He had spent the morning organizing his thoughts, carefully preparing the evidence, but he knew that no amount of preparation could fully capture the emotional weight of the confrontation ahead. Olivia sat on the sofa, her hands folded tightly in her lap, her eyes flicking between Daniel and Emily. She had processed the documents, reread messages, and traced the chain of manipulations, yet the fear that she might misinterpret something still lingered. Emily, sensing the gravity of the moment, sat near the edge of the coffee table, arms crossed, a defensive smirk lingering on her face, but faltering as she met Daniel's steady gaze. "Emily," Daniel began, his voice calm but unwavering, "we need to talk about everything that's happened, about the doubts, the lies, and the manipulations. I want to understand why you did this, and you need to hear the consequences of your actions." Emily's eyes darted to Olivia briefly, then back to Daniel. I just wanted Mom to see me. I didn't think it would get this far," she admitted, voice shaking. "I didn't mean to hurt anyone. I just felt invisible." Olivia exhaled slowly, a mixture of relief and lingering frustration. "Emily," she said softly but firmly, "I see you. You are noticed. But lying, manipulating, making us doubt someone who loves us, it breaks trust. And trust is what holds a family together." Daniel pulled the documents closer, methodically presenting the timeline of events. Emails, texts, client reports, even small personal reminders, all evidence of his consistency and honesty. This shows everything. Every day, every interaction, you had a choice to interpret things correctly or let doubt grow, and instead you chose deception. Emily's defenses began to crumble under the undeniable weight of proof. The thrill of control, the subtle victories of her manipulation, gave way to guilt and recognition of the hurt she had caused. I didn't understand. I thought it was just teasing, a way to get attention. I didn't see the pain." Olivia reached over, gently placing her hand on Emily's shoulder. "The pain is real, Emily, and the consequences are real too. Trust once broken takes time to rebuild. You will need to earn it back, not just with words, but through consistent honesty and accountability." Daniel nodded in agreement. "This is not about punishment alone. It's about understanding the impact of your actions and learning from it. Deception can damage relationships irreparably. but honesty, even when hard, can rebuild what's been broken. Emily lowered her gaze, tears welling in her eyes. I understand. I'm sorry, she said quietly. I never wanted to hurt you. I didn't know another way. The room was quiet for a moment, the weight of their shared emotions settling over them. Olivia spoke again, her voice gentle yet firm. We all make mistakes, Emily, but we must face them. We must confront the truth, and we must accept the consequences. That is how we grow, how we heal. Daniel felt a sense of resolve solidify within him. The confrontation, though painful, was necessary. The emotional spiral, the seeds of deception, and the social pressures had all led to this point, a moment where truth and acknowledgement could finally meet.
From this point on, Daniel continued, we commit to transparency. No more half-truths, no more whispers behind closed doors. We face challenges together, openly and honestly. That is the only way we restore trust. Olivia nodded, squeezing Daniel's hand briefly. We can do this. Together, she said softly. Her eyes then met Emily's. And you, Emily, must understand that love isn't manipulation. It's honesty, it's empathy, it's facing mistakes head on. Emily's tears fell freely now, her small voice breaking. I will try, she promised. I will do better. The family sat in silence for a long moment, the tension gradually softening into a cautious, fragile calm. Daniel looked out the window at the city lights, reflecting on the weeks of turmoil. The confrontation had laid bare the consequences of deception, but it had also opened a door to reconciliation and growth. In the days that followed, Emily began to make small but meaningful changes, apologizing for her manipulations, engaging honestly in conversations, and slowly rebuilding her relationship with Olivia and Daniel. Olivia, in turn, worked to restore her trust in Daniel while fostering an environment where Emily could learn the value of transparency and integrity. Daniel continued to observe, guide, and support both women with patience. He recognized that the aftermath of deceit was delicate, requiring consistent reinforcement of truth, understanding, and mutual respect. The Harper household, though scarred by recent events, was beginning to find its rhythm again. The confrontation had not erased the past, but it had illuminated the path forward. Each member of the family now faced the consequences of their actions, understood the gravity of trust, and acknowledged the need for honesty as the foundation of their relationships. As Daniel stood in the kitchen one evening, watching Olivia and Emily interact with cautious warmth, he felt a quiet sense of relief. The storm had passed its fiercest point. The lies had been confronted, and the consequences were being integrated into the collective awareness. The city outside continued its ceaseless motion, indifferent to the intimate battles within one apartment. But inside, the Harper family had begun the slow, deliberate work of healing. The confrontation had been the turning point, a moment of clarity, accountability, and the first real step toward rebuilding trust. Daniel knew that scars would remain, subtle reminders of what had transpired. Yet he also knew that confrontation and acknowledgement, coupled with consistent truth, could transform those scars into lessons, guiding the family toward a stronger, more resilient future. In the quiet of that evening, as the lights of Manhattan shimmered against the dark sky, Daniel felt a cautious optimism. The web of lies had been dismantled, the emotional spiral had been addressed, and for the first time in weeks, the Harper household could breathe, truly, and begin the work of reconnecting, not in illusion, but in reality.
The Harper apartment felt different now. The weight of doubt, the subtle tension that had once lingered like a thick fog, had begun to lift. Daniel moved through the rooms with a quiet attentiveness, noticing the small gestures of peace, Olivia arranging flowers on the counter, Emily laughing softly as she recounted a story from school. The air carried a sense of cautious optimism, fragile yet real, like sunlight breaking through the clouds after a storm. Olivia sat at the dining table, sipping her coffee and flipping through a photo album they had left untouched for months. Each image, a family vacation, a birthday party, a simple Sunday morning, reminded her of what had once felt secure and what they were now working to restore. She traced her fingers over the pictures of Daniel and Emily, remembering both the pain and the moments of connection. Daniel joined her, sliding into the chair across the table. It's strange, isn't it? How quickly trust can erode, and yet how slowly it rebuilds. Olivia nodded, her eyes reflecting a mixture of relief and contemplation. I realized something, she said softly. Trust isn't just about believing someone won't lie. It's about believing in their integrity, even when circumstances make it hard. And I forgot that for a while. Daniel reached across the table, taking her hand gently. We all forget sometimes, he replied. What matters is recognizing it and taking steps to restore it. Emily entered the room, her steps light, cautious. She hesitated, then spoke with a quiet sincerity that seemed almost foreign to her previous self. Mom, Dad, I know I caused a lot of pain. I see now that lies and manipulation hurt more than they ever help. I want to try to do better. Olivia's eyes softened as she reached for her daughter's hand. I see you, Emily, and we will help you. But it has to start with honesty from now on. Daniel nodded. Yes, honesty, accountability, and patience. That's how we rebuild what was broken. The days that followed were a slow, deliberate process of healing. Emily made efforts to communicate openly, expressing her feelings without resorting to manipulation. Olivia practiced listening without judgment, striving to discern truth from perception. Daniel continued to provide calm guidance, reinforcing the family's commitment to integrity and understanding. One evening, as they sat together watching the city lights shimmer through the windows, Daniel reflected on the journey they had endured. Weeks of deception, doubt, and emotional turmoil had tested their relationships to the brink. Yet, through confrontation, reflection, and the courage to face uncomfortable truths, they had found a way forward. Olivia spoke, her voice tinged with quiet gratitude. I've learned that love isn't just about affection or presence. It's about trust, patience, and the willingness to see beyond appearances. Emily's actions reminded me how fragile trust can be, and how easily it can be undermined by misperception. Emily nodded, her voice steady. And I've learned that wanting attention or validation doesn't justify manipulation. Being honest, even when it's hard, builds real connections. I don't want to lose this family over lies ever again. Daniel watched them, a sense of calm settling in his chest. He realized that the conflict had been painful, but it had also illuminated the core of their relationships. The lies, the emotional spirals, the confrontations, all had revealed vulnerabilities, but also the capacity for resilience, understanding, and reconciliation. In the following weeks, subtle changes reinforced the progress they were making. Meals were shared without tension, conversations carried openness, and small gestures of care, Emily bringing Olivia a cup of tea, Olivia leaving a note for Daniel, signaled a renewed sense of connection. Each action, though simple, was a brick in the reconstruction of trust. Daniel reflected privately on the broader implications. The experience had taught him the power of perception, the subtle influence of social pressures, and the importance of vigilance in maintaining integrity. Lies could grow quietly, doubts could fester in silence, but truth, once pursued with patience and clarity, had the power to restore even the most fractured bonds. One evening as the family sat together in the living room, Daniel glanced around at Olivia and Emily. The apartment, though still bearing the scars of recent turmoil, now felt alive with cautious hope. He realized that resolution was not about erasing the past, but integrating it, acknowledging mistakes, confronting lies, and consciously choosing honesty moving forward. Olivia broke the silence, smiling faintly. We've come a long way, and we still have a long way to go. But for the first time in weeks, I feel safe. Not perfect, not untroubled, but safe. Emily leaned against her mother, a quiet acknowledgement of her remorse and commitment to change. I understand now, she said softly. Love isn't about control. It's about trust, honesty, and respect. I want to do right by that. Daniel felt a warmth in his chest, a quiet satisfaction that came not from victory, but from endurance, clarity, and integrity. The family had confronted their fractures, faced the consequences, and begun the painstaking work of rebuilding. The emotional spiral that had threatened to unravel them had been confronted, and in its aftermath, a renewed sense of connection began to take root. As night fell over Manhattan, the Harper apartment glowed softly from within, a beacon of fragile, hopeful resolution. Daniel looked out over the city lights, reflecting on the lessons learned, that trust is both delicate and resilient, that confrontation is necessary for growth, and that the pursuit of truth, though difficult, is ultimately the path to reconciliation. In the quiet of the evening, Daniel felt a profound sense of gratitude. They had survived the storm of deception, navigated the treacherous waters of doubt, and emerged with a clearer understanding of themselves and each other. The Harper family, scarred but not broken, had discovered the enduring strength of honesty, the transformative power of forgiveness, and the quiet, persistent beauty of connection. And in that understanding, they found peace, not a perfection without flaw, but a truth that could sustain them through whatever challenges lay ahead.